Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Northshire Presents. For those of you who don't know me, I am Rachel Person, the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here, as I so often am these days, with my friend and colleague, David Wood, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. A couple of quick notes before we get started. First of all, you may have noticed as you came in that we are recording this evening's presentation for future broadcasts on our YouTube channel. However, we have the settings arranged so that only those of us who are unmuted and speaking will be recorded. So you can have your video on if you wish, and you will not be recorded for posterity. Please use the chat throughout the evening to type in any questions that you have. We will have time for audience questions at the end of the night, and David and I will save up your questions and pose them for you later on this evening. So make liberal use of that chat. And then last of all, a note of thanks and a request for a favor. The note of thanks is to thank you for your incredible support of Northshire and independent businesses and independent bookselling through this past year and a half. It's not an easy business, and our continued survival is owed to the incredible loyalty and support of our customers. And we're deeply grateful for that. And then the favor we have to ask is to ask you to once again consider shopping as early as you can for the holiday season this year. If you're planning to buy books, the supply chain and publishing is very messed up right now. We've had multiple books have their publication dates postponed, and we've been told that certain titles, once they are sold out, they will be gone. So if you can get a head start, if there are specific books you know you want, ordering them sooner rather than later will help us tremendously. So those are the notes tonight, and now I get to turn things over to David to introduce our very special guest this evening.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Well, I'm delighted to welcome back to Northshire James Gus Speth for They Knew, the U.S. federal government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis. We had the pleasure of hosting him for one of our earliest virtual events during the pandemic on Earth Day 2020 and in celebration of his poetry books from Shire's Press, What We Have Instead, and It's Already Tomorrow. Gus is a legendary environmentalist. He served as a member and chairman of the U.S. Council on Environmental Equality during the Carter administration, and from 1993 to 1999 was administrator of the United Nations Development Program and served as chair of the UN Development Group. He is the author of numerous books, including the award-winning American Crisis series. He's taught at Georgetown, at Yale, and at the Vermont Law School. He founded the World Resources Institute and co-founded the Natural Resources Defense Council. His new book, They Knew, has been called Devastating, Enraging, and Indispensable by Naomi Klein, It's Searing Indictment by Elizabeth Colbert, and while Bill McKibben said, with skill and dedication, Speth has documented precisely what we knew and when we knew it. This book is a shocking reminder of the chances for action we've already missed and a spur to finally move with vigor the climate crisis demands. All the royalties for the sale of They Knew goes to Our Children's Trust. We are very lucky to be joined tonight also by Christi Cooper, a PhD scientist, documentary filmmaker, and Emmy Award-winning cinematographer. She's the director of Youth v. Gov, the acclaimed documentary about Giuliana versus United States, which just won the Grand Teton Award at the Jackson Wild Media Awards. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire Bookstore, Christi Cooper and James Gustave Speth. Gus, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about how They Knew came about?
Well, it's an interesting story because the lawsuit that was brought by Our Children's Trust on behalf of 21 young plaintiffs to force the federal government into effective climate action, they needed, for that lawsuit, a history of what the federal government had actually done during this period. And they knew I was in the Carter administration a long time ago. And they asked me if I would write up the Carter administration, and I said, sure. So I wrote a little history of the Carter administration based on all the documents I could locate. And they said, well, we really like this. Would you please do all the other administrations? It's a true story. And so I undertook to do the whole story from LBJ through Trump. And it was quite an ordeal. And I think but it's a very sad story when you get down to it. But there are sad stories that need to be told and sad stories that need to be understood and learned from. And I hope and I think that this is such a book. The book grew out of the large report that I did for our Children's Trust and the well-known Giuliana against U.S. Litigation, and it's dedicated to the 21 children, young people now, who brought this lawsuit originally about 6 years ago, sad to say. The plaintiffs and their lawyers are still in court, pushing hard for a good result. And one day, what I've written may be, in the courtroom, and I may be testifying on the basis of it in a proceeding. I just hope it comes to that. So that's a bit of the background. I think it's an important story. It's not a stand up and cheer story. It's a story to, I think, make people very concerned, more alarmed than perhaps they are, a spur to action, and the information that you need to be effective, because you can't know the future and what we need to do if we don't understand the past. So that's why I did it. That's why we moved it from a document that was prepared initially for a court proceeding into a book that MIT Press has now published. And some of this material that's in the book has also been covered by Christi Cooper in her wonderful film Youth v. Gov. So I'm delighted that she's here to ask me some questions.
Gus, I'm absolutely honored to be on this panel with you. I so much admire the work that you've done throughout your career, and also the incredible evidence that you have brought to the Giuliana case with the work that you've done on your expert report, and now with this amazing book. We had always talked about that if the case never was able to go to trial, that we were wanting to present all of this evidence in our film so that at least there would be some public forum. And I'm so excited that you now have released this book, because there's another platform where folks can know all of this history and can know what our government has known and the policies that they have enacted over the last 6 decades. So Gus, we had about 2 years ago, we had a really fun adventure doing your interview for our film, and had very in-depth conversation about your knowledge of the previous government administrations and their knowledge around greenhouse gases. I was wondering if you could kind of share with the viewers tonight a little bit about your past and your experience with the Carter administration and the work that you were doing. This is now 50 years ago, the work that you were doing in the administration on trying to sound the alarm bells.
Well, thank you, Christi, very much for the comments. I think the reason that that the plaintiffs wanted me first to do the Carter administration was because it was a very important juncture when the science really first moved into the politics and the policy arena. And it's impressive when you go back and look at it, how much we knew. Let's pick a date, say 1980, that long ago, how much we knew about the climate threat. There were memos and papers going throughout the Carter administration at various times, statements by the president, big commitment on the part of Jimmy Carter to renewable energy and energy efficiency gains, and a national goal set for renewable energy of 20% by 2000. It was an awakening to the climate issue and to the need to put the country on a different energy path. I'm not saying the Carter administration was perfect, but we knew so much back then about the climate science that we were able, as reported in the New York Times at the time, we were able to suggest an upper bound for the buildup of greenhouse gases way back in 1980. And we might have been a little generous by some of today's estimates of what we should be doing, but we weren't far off, and it was important that we understood way back then that we needed to get busy putting a ceiling on the buildup of these gases internationally, globally. And well, of course, it didn't happen. After Carter, we had the Reagan administration, and I can talk about the history of the whole, give you a nutshell of the whole picture in pretty short order, I think.
And I think it's helpful to also, yeah, I think it's also helpful if, when you paint that kind of broad picture to highlight some of those tipping point moments or those decision moments, I think, throughout the administrations that you shared with me and that, I was able to pull out from your expert report is during each administration, there really were pivotal moments in our history where we could have made different decisions.
Well, if we had continued to build on the start that Jimmy Carter made and gone down the track that he identified, we could have largely dealt with the climate issue from the U.S. point of view, anyhow, by now. We could have had a smooth trajectory, built the changes that we needed in, and of course that's not what happened, and we're faced now with a crisis. And the need for deep and drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions quickly. So what the pattern that emerges from looking back over all these administrations is that you had a series of administrations, I would say 3, that took the problem seriously, that knew they had to do something, that knew that this was an issue, and did different things in these 3 administrations to address the issue. Some more far-reaching than others, some more preliminary. In Carter's case, it was preliminary. We were just starting to work on the issue. But the Clinton administration understood very well what needed to be done, and the Obama administration understood well what needed to be done. And in the sense that they took it seriously. They moved beyond having available information to really internalizing it and saying, now we have to act. Each of those 3, unfortunately, was followed by a flamethrower administration, which I document in the book. Reagan came in after Carter and erased a lot of what he'd done, for example, on renewable energy, almost all of it. George W. Bush came in after Clinton, and he was terrible on this issue, and then thirdly, Trump, of course, came in after Obama and systematically went after attacking everything that Obama had tried to do on this issue. So no administration really, until we get to Biden, had made a commitment to sharp reductions in emissions. But at least 3 of them had understood that they had to do something and were moving. None of them were very good. Some were better than others. And if you pardon getting a little bit political, it just happens that the ones that were least seized with the need to do something were the Democratic administrations, and they were followed by Republican administrations. I hate to put it that way, but that's the reality, and we may as well understand it and face it. Because now a lot of the Republican Party is still not appreciating, to say the least, the seriousness of this issue.
Can you share with our guests tonight a little bit how we got into this predicament with our government being in bed with the fossil fuel industry? Where in our history did this strong collaboration and partnership between these 2 entities begin, and why has that really messed things up?
Well, there has been historically a tremendous amount of money to be made, and I think any time in our society as it is currently set up, you create such an opportunity for wealth accumulation and capital accumulation, you're going to find it inhabiting democracy. And that is clearly what has happened here. And it persists to this day because at this very minute, the elements, almost all of the fossil fuel industry in its various components, from pipelines to oil and gas and coal, and they're fighting like crazy right now to try to be sure that they don't have to do very much in response to what the president is trying to do. And it's a quiet battle going on within the framework of this, the reconciliation package and other places in our current politics. But I think the opposition to doing anything responsible has been three sources. One has been the tremendous political clout and drive to maximize its profits out of the fossil fuel industry in various components of it. And this is huge. This is just a fact of our political life, where so much depends on money and financial contributions and promises to leave jobs in certain places and remove them if necessary from other places. And the politicians are scared. And it's a sad, sad situation. The second factor has been that once you realize that you've got to do something about the climate issue, then you really have to recognize the importance of strong federal action, of strong government action. And in this atmosphere that Reagan started, where government is cast as the enemy, then there's a tremendous ideological backlash against anything the federal government would tries to do that's important and that is viewed as interference in the economy, and that's been very big, and it continues today. Thirdly, our system of political economy is really hooked on growth, and it is the reality right now that growth is really hooked on fossil fuels. And it doesn't mean that we can't dramatically change that situation, but that is the situation right now. We're still 80% dependent on fossil fuels. Now we need to get to zero by 2050 at the latest, but those are the factors that I think we're up against. And that is the backdrop in a way to the book, because in the book what we see is that no administration, Republican or Democrat, has really committed to a dramatic reduction or even a long-term reduction in fossil fuel use. Even Obama, who did some good things for climate, was very proud of having promoted fracking and having promoted exports of U.S. fossil fuels.
Making us the largest oil and gas producer in the world.
There we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a pattern here where you learn certain lessons, I think, from looking at this pattern that I report in the book. And one of those conclusions is, well, we really certainly cannot depend on the federal government. We can't depend on good science. We've had a lot of that, and we needed it, and it's been very important and will be in the future. We can't depend on what I would call comfortable advocacy. My life has been one, I think, of comfortable advocacy, and perhaps many of the listeners here have been engaged in that. We've got to get beyond that. And I think so in my view, several things are necessary to get us out of this situation we're in. We know we can't count on our political parties. There's a lot of lessons we've learned from the book about what doesn't work, and I just listed some. So what do we do? Well, I think we need a massive civil mobilization in the country. We need to get beyond comfortable advocacy to more demanding advocacy, more consistent advocacy, not one big march in New York that many of us participated in, but something every day in the face of our political leaders. Some of it funny, I hope, humorous, some of it dead serious, all of it nonviolent, but we need to be out there in the streets and elsewhere in the offices, sitting in whatever you want to do, but we need to be every day into this. Secondly, we need judicial intervention.
That's right.
We need a constitutional protection, and that's what's being sought in the Giuliana case. But just remember this, unless there is a constitutional protection, unless the courts are enforcing it, then any administration, no matter how good, can be flipped in the next election. And we'll be back, we'll see the pattern that we've seen in the past repeat itself yet again. And we can't allow that to happen. So I think the courts are important. The executive branch has failed us. The legislative branch has failed us. Now we need the judicial branch to step up to the plate. And that's happened in some countries abroad. And we need it to happen here. And the third thing I would just say is that one lesson that comes out of all this to me is that the system that we're living in, based on consumerism, growth, corporate power, GDP measurement, and vast inequalities in the society, a lot of scared people, a lot of people at the margin. This is a system that's not going to do the things that we need to do to deal with the climate issue over time. So we need to walk on two legs, I think. One is to do what we can do now. And the immediate thing here, I think, is in part to be damn sure that everything that Biden and Bernie and others want to get done. But then we also need some deep changes. We need a constitutional change, and we need to start moving on the other foot, which is to introduce changes in the political economy that will make dealing with these types of issues more straightforward and not the most difficult things in the world.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing the lessons learned, like how do we take this whole history, which you called in my film the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in history. How do we take what our past is and move forward with it? And I really appreciate that. I wonder if we should share a little bit with our guests tonight. Let's focus a little bit on the judicial system and why these kids are taking this to the courts rather than marching in the streets and going to their politicians. And that was the whole premise of your original work on creating this scientific this expert report, and which has eventually led to your book.
Right.
I think it's really great for the audience members to know, and not everybody knows this, that in order to have a constitutional claim, you can't have a claim based on inaction. And so many folks, when they talk about what the government has done or why we're in this position, it's because people say, well, the government hasn't done anything. There's climate inaction. And I think what your work shows so well is that this is not about government inaction. It's about willful and affirmative action that the government has taken to lock us into a fossil fuel-based energy system that's now violating these young people's constitutional rights to life, liberty, property, personal security. And I think that's a really important point for folks to understand, that a constitutional claim is based on action that's harming these young people. And I'm wondering if you can just expand a little bit more on your experience and your knowledge of this action versus inaction.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. People say, well, the government didn't act. Well, they did act. They have leased a tremendous portion of our current even fossil fuel use is from federal resources. They've permitted, they've researched, they've advocated. The federal government has been the single biggest player in creating this U.S. fossil fuel economy. And it's precisely, because the federal government has actively and knowingly, this is important, actively and knowingly endangered the prospects of future generations and current generation of young people, like the plaintiffs in the case, is that action that is creating the constitutional claim. The Constitution doesn't protect everybody all the time against all kinds of injuries and problems, but if the federal government is creating an endangerment knowingly, and it's a huge thing, then it rises to a constitutional claim, and that's what the plaintiffs are asserting here. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's important not merely for right now, but it's important because that constitutional requirement can guide us into the future administration after administration, regardless of who comes into power.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there, do you feel like there was, one single moment when you were doing all of your research and compiling all of this information together? And, I remember poring over your scientific report, or it's not your scientific report, your expert report, at the time when we were researching for our film and doing development. I spent 1.5 years digging into all of this history that you had put together. And I think you remember the interview that we did for the film. I think you said it was the most extensive and researched interview that you'd ever gone through, which was fun for us, but exhausting for you. Yeah, I mean, this is so much information in your book. And I'm just wondering if you feel like there's a single moment that kind of blew you away when you were putting all of this together.
Well, first, I want to just acknowledge our Children's Trust, a very powerful advocacy for children that is behind this litigation. And they had accumulated a vast amount of documentary research when I came onto the scene. And I couldn't have done this book without the tremendous amount of documentary research that they had accumulated. They had been to all the presidential libraries and other things and really done a great job of pulling the available information together. So I give them a lot of credit. I think one thing this exhaustive kind of treatment of the situation leads to, is a realization that there's really no room at all for climate denial, for rejection of the science. I mean, I looked at what each administration knew about the climate science, from LBJ all the way, through Trump. And it's a consistent story. I mean, the basics of the climate science picture have not changed. It's been validated over and over again. If the opposite had happened, where the science got was proven wrong, or projections were shown to be ridiculous and other things, but that's not what happened. The early projections are coming true, and so there's the real hoax is climate denial, is climate doubt about the science. So, you ask about a specific moment. Well, I think one moment that was very telling is that we, perhaps in our naivete, thought that when the greenhouse effect was finally detected, when the issue moved from being sort of the greenhouse theory to the greenhouse fact, that would really motivate the government to respond. People could always say, well, it's just a theory, it's just a theory. But if it actually became documented that things were changing as a result of human activities and putting these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, well, that would really change things. So we thought that. I would say we thought that for maybe 15 years. But along comes Jim Hansen. And I dwell on this in the book, and testifies before Congress with other great scientists like George Woodwell in the mid 80s. And they point out that lo and behold, we are seeing the signal of climate change in the noise of the weather patterns. And so that, well, we thought, well, maybe something's really going to happen now. Well, you know the story. That was mid 1980, and now we're 35
40 years later.
what, and we're still dealing with a bunch of nonsense about whether it's really the science is real, and the president of the United States called him things he thinks it may be a hoax, and oh Lord, we really have got to take it with the utmost seriousness now, and bring some new tools into the picture, as I mentioned earlier.
So when Julia first approached you to work on this expert report for the case, what you mentioned earlier that maybe in other points in your career, other points in the past, that that you are now taking a different mode of advocacy, or you're definitely feeling the urgency around this. Can you talk about why you decided to take on this daunting task to be an expert for this case?
Well, it's hard to imagine any issue more important, and as you mentioned earlier, that one thing I've said in a number of contexts, including the book, is that this is, in my view, the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic. You may have your own issue that you think is more important or as important, but this, to me, is the most important. I can't imagine anything more critical to the future of my grandchildren, to put it personally, than getting a handle on this issue before it really rumbles out of control. And that was when we start getting these positive feedbacks where the climate change creates more climate change, and that's beginning. And so the urgency is now, and we need to take a different tack. And I've worked on this issue now since 1979, actually, and it's what I've been doing, and my colleagues indeed have been doing, has not been notably successful, and I think the situation in the real impacts in the real world are driving change. The media has finally moved around and is acknowledging that some of the horrific events that are occurring in the real world in our country in terms of drought and floods and storms and fires, they are linked to climate change. And so the media has come around and started being helpful. Nature is giving us some big warning signs itself. And the politicians have picked up on it. That combination is helpful. But if those factors are going to be really impactful at the level we need, we're going to have to push ourselves into uncomfortable positions of advocacy and demands and giving money and other things and support for organizations that are carrying this fight. We've got to have a huge civic mobilization in the country to deal with it. And we need this judicial intervention that we've been talking about off and on in this conversation. The courts can be an immense help. They have been in Europe, in several countries. And we need the judiciary, and particularly we need a constitutional interpretation that gives young people protection.
Yeah, and part of the mobilization, I guess, that that I was interested in helping out with was to create this documentary about the case. Should we share a little trailer of the film so folks can meet some of these plaintiffs and see a little bit more what this case is about?
Please do.
Okay, hold on, everybody, just a second.
Like youth who have come before us in the civil rights movement and other social justice movements, it is often the young among us that shine the light on systems of injustice.
For a lot of young people right now, life is really scary.
Hurricane Matthew hit head on, and it's just so terrifying.
If this drought gets any worse, our way of life will dissolve.
Just as my family's farm is threatened by climate change, so too are the very stability and vitality of our country.
The government is taking actions that are directly contributing to the destruction of our planet.
We have evidence going back to the 50s that government and the fossil fuel industry knew that if they continued to burn fossil fuels, that it would cause catastrophic impacts.
That's when they started editing climate reports.
It's all because of choices that we had no participation in. And I'm scared for my future.
It's the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic.
21 young people ages 11 to 22 are suing the federal government
over policies they say are destroying their world.
We are not willing to wait around for someone else's timeline to dictate the trajectory of our lives.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now!
I look forward to standing in court with all my fellow plaintiffs. I love you all.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
Whether we win the lawsuit or not, we are already making ripples in the world to show real change can come from young people standing up for what they believe in.
All right.
Of all the cases working their way through the federal court system, none is more interesting or potentially more life-changing than Giuliana versus the United States.
So hopefully that gives folks a, just kind of a little bit more of a taste of what this case is all about that you have provided so much guidance on. And I think that I feel so privileged that I was able to use so much of your material and your research and your participation in this film. I think the historical aspect that we were able to weave into the story is so critical, I think, for the understanding of how we move forward.
Well, thank you, but I'm not nearly as important in this story as the plaintiffs and their attorneys, Julia Olson and Phil Gregory, but the film was great. I've seen the whole thing, and the trailer was very moving. And tell us again about this award you just won.
Yeah, I was just in the Jackson Wild Media Awards last week. It's it's considered nature's nature films Oscars event, and we won the Grand Teton Award, which is the best of festival. So we were incredibly honored. It's somebody's asking what's the name of the film. It's called Youth v. Gov. And we're mostly honored that this film is receiving recognition because we really believe that what's really touching people, like you said, is the heart of the story is the plaintiffs, and it's their personal impact stories and their journey through this historical case, this historical and landmark case. So it's been my honor and privilege to work with you, Gus, and helping to create that small snippet, which I think is a really important snippet in understanding how we got here and how we move forward.
Amen.
Do you have any final lessons and big take-home messages that you would like to leave with our guests before we open it up for questions? Is there, what would you your biggest heart's desire to happen with this book?
Well, I think the book is an education for people who want to know and need to know the history of how we got to where we are. We're not going to find the right path forward until we understand how we got where we are. And the book is a serious and you know, reliable. I insist, a reliable depiction of what each administration knew about the climate science, what they knew about alternative paths to get onto, and what they actually did. And what they all did in the end was to continue to sustain and promote the fossil fuel economy. And we need a dramatic break with that pattern of 50 years. And I think the book will, you know, does underscore that and point to these lessons that I've mentioned earlier as, and it's a cautionary tale because it says that, you know, we need to understand how difficult this has been in the past if we're going to do enough today politically. And
I guess I have one more question before I hand it back to Rachel. Is how feasible is it for us to get off of fossil fuels?
Well, it's been feasible to get off of fossil fuels, you know, for over 40 years. You just have to start. Now we have a bigger challenge than we did if we'd started 40 years ago with the transition. You know, we know a lot about what to do. The prices of renewable energy sources are way down, and you know, we can build the right kind of grids and we need to. So there's a lot that needs to be done in the kind of mega way of national policy, big picture directions of renewables and efficiency gains, and dealing with the agricultural emissions and other things. But there's also a lot, you know, that we still should do individually and in our communities. So we need every community to declare a climate emergency. We need every community to start getting quickly to net zero emissions. We need a state policy in Vermont, for example, to make this Global Warming Solutions Act really work and work quickly and work deeply and well. And there's a process right now to have an impact on that, on the state law. So at all levels, from, you know, sort of international affairs, which John Kerry's going to lead at the new upcoming COP20 Conference of the Parties 26 in Glasgow later this month. You know, we have to push at that level. We have to push at the national level, state level, local level. It can be done, but it won't be done unless we all become, you know, really in a way hyperactive on the subject.
Yeah, I agree. We need every community across the country holding their governments accountable.
Thank you both so much, Gus and Christi. This is fascinating. And please type any questions you have in the chat if you have any more. We've already got a few. This first one's from Sue. She says, how can the young people advocate activism for their peers? There are extraordinary young people leading the way, but many are focused on their own lives and feel powerless.
Do you want me to take that, Gus?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that'd be
sure.
great.
You know, yes, a lot of the young people are feeling very, very powerless right now during this time. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do with our impact campaign with this film is the first step is awareness and outreach, right? We really need to shift the conversation, I think, on the climate crisis, that this is no longer about personal responsibility. It's not about recycling and riding your bike and, you know, being vegetarian. Those things are all great. We should all be striving to do those things within our own lives because it probably will just make your life better. But the real action that we need is systemic change. And that will only happen if we are holding our governments accountable. And so I think for young people, I think it's so important for them to understand this history of what Gus depicts in his book. It's so important for them to understand how our government functions, how our court system works, what their constitutional rights are. And I think once they have these tools in place, they have the language and they have the vernacular to go out and fight for their rights to be protected. So I strongly believe, I have a 20-year-old daughter, and I have been, teaching her for the last 10 years about her rights and encouraging her to stand up for those and to understand what they are, and to try to, come into the movement and into these actions kind of with that as a basis.
There are now a proliferation of organizations for, young people to participate, and they range from national groups like the Sunrise Movement to others. But in a way, the young people are carrying this issue today more than any other group, and that's so encouraging and so vital. And I don't want to exaggerate, but I think in a way, it all began with this lawsuit. I mean, this effort with the young people bringing this lawsuit 6 years ago really paved the way to the youth movement that we have today. I'd never distract from anybody else who participated, and of course Greta has had a huge role in focusing things. But the Giuliana plaintiffs and the Giuliana litigation was a pioneering effort that opened up this issue to young people.
So Bonnie asked the question, wasn't this case dismissed? And so really just sort of generally, what's going on with the Giuliana case right now? Where is it?
Yeah, well, it's, the federal government, Republicans and Democrats have pulled out all the stops to oppose these young people getting into court. And I really am disappointed that the Biden administration has persisted with that pattern. And I hope that as the new administration gets control of the Justice Department, that will change. Right now, it's very much before the district court judge again, as it has been several times, and she is being asked to amend the complaint to deal with some of the issues that came up in the earlier litigation, and to allow this to move forward judicially. So, we expect a decision. I think the plaintiffs expect a decision, any week,
any day.
And but it's still going forward, and there's still hope, and there's still fight, and I think so we'll have to hope for the best there. It's not something that, it's been, what's been said has been said, and it's now before the court, as we say.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that where the case kind of got hung up was with the last Ninth Circuit Court decision, where the three judges in the Ninth Circuit Court, they got really hung up on the injunctive relief that the plaintiffs were seeking, which was basically asking the courts to mandate that the government implement climate recovery plans. And the motion that Gus is referring to right now is asking the court's permission to amend their complaint to put the focus on declaratory relief. And declaratory relief is really important in the court of law. This was the foundation of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, with the very first Supreme Court decision. It was based on declaratory relief, simply stating that these young people's constitutional rights were being violated by the government. They had a constitutional right, and that it was being violated. It wasn't until the following year that desegregation actually happened, and that the courts mandated desegregation in the schools. And so very similar to that, the Giuliana plaintiffs are asking for this declaratory relief and for the focus to be on that. And as Gus said, we're very hopeful that Judge Aikens is going to allow them to amend their complaint, which would put it back on track for trial again. So it's in the district courts at the moment.
Thank you, Christi. There's a question here from Elizabeth. She says, Gus, you alluded to the need for action by the masses. It's worked in the past by putting pressure on Washington. Greta tried, as have others, to nurse a mass response, but it hasn't taken off as much as it needs. What's the answer? More climate marches or something more radical?
Constitutional climate change lawsuits.
Well, that would be a big breakthrough, let me tell you, and that's what we're hoping for, is a new pattern of judicial action that can move things along. I think, as I said earlier, I think the advocacy of the past has been in some ways pretty laid back, for the most part, not always. But when Sunrise sat in on, Nancy Pelosi's office and started insisting on attention, and when their enthusiasm was picked up by the Green New Deal advocates in the Congress, this is very important, and I think the type of activism that that young people from Greta on out have brought to this needs to be expanded upon. We have a pattern of letting up. We had this huge and very impressive and successful in many ways a march on the climate issue in New York City. Busloads of people went from various places in Vermont down there. It was huge, but it wasn't really followed up, was it? I mean, there needs to be that kind of sustained action, because it's really, we're up against the need for action if we're going to save the world for our children and grandchildren. I mean, it's that serious. Things are going badly wrong. I mean, I don't want to go through all the climate projections, but we don't have any time left now, and that should spur people to a different type of insisting. And we cannot have our politicians on the fence anymore, or worrying about their contributions from the fossil fuel industry. We need to elect good people who are going to carry this fight. And so this 2022 election is going to be vital. I mean, think of how close this issue is in the Congress now. We are hanging by a thread, literally. And, and under that is the abyss.
Yeah, and I would just add to Gus's response that in June, Judge Aikens ordered the Biden administration to begin confidential settlement discussions with the plaintiffs. And so I think the more pressure that we can put on the Biden administration in whatever form we can to take a different stance on this case and to allow these plaintiffs to go to trial, to have their day in court, and or to settle the case. As Gus mentioned much earlier in the conversation, a court-supported resolution would provide a long-lasting climate policy that subsequent administrations could not overturn through executive actions and legislative actions. So we have this huge opportunity right now to put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration, to seize this opportunity.
I mean, in Vermont, is our delegation? Bernie has been wonderful. Have our other two representatives in Washington been wonderful on this? What is our state going to do? Has our governor been wonderful? I don't think these people are seized with this issue at the level that they need to be. Only Bernie.
It's very true.
Gus, Christi, thank you both so much. That's an important note to end on. We appreciate you both coming in to joining us so much this evening. The book is They Knew, the U.S. federal government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis. You can order it at the link in the chat from northshire.com. Thank you both so much, and I can't wait to watch your documentary, Christi.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us. Thanks, Gus.
Well, thank all of you for hosting this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all, and we'll see you at another Northshire Presents virtual event soon, and take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night.